mucous membranes, and then there is also serous membranes. Serous membranes are something we were supposed to study in chapter 1, and we just, we had a hurricane, what can I say, right? So we didn't get to study them back there. So all I'm gonna have you know about them, because we studied, do you remember the ventral body cavity and the dorsal body cavity? Does that come back at all, chapter 1, right? Dorsal body cavity was all about the brain, and then ventral body cavity was all the organs on the inside, right? Good. Serous membranes are simply the linings of those cavities. The linings of the body cavities that also cover the organs. Okay? And it's a wet membrane. So when a surgery is going on and you cut down and you come onto the top of an organ, boy, there's a stomach right there, it'll have this beautiful, like, handy wrap around it. This beautiful glistening membrane. That's kind of what it looks like, right? It's pretty cool, right? Except it's not see-through. So you have that, and that's just a serous membrane. That's all it is, okay? All right, the last membrane is called the cutaneous membrane. And the cutaneous membrane is just a fancy word, because we have all these fancy words, for the skin. The cutaneous membrane is simply the skin. That's all it is. Have you ever heard of a subcutaneous injection or subcutaneous anything? Have you ever heard that word before? Mm-hmm. So that simply means under the what? Skin. There you go, okay? So unfortunately, we know that skin is stratified squamous, but here's a whole nother word that we'll use, okay? So here, let me give you one more, because sometimes people say some of these membranes are wet, and some of these membranes are dry. So let's go back and characterize them by wet or dry, okay? Endothelium, the inside of your blood vessels in your heart, is that wet or dry in there? Pretty wet, it's blood, right? Okay, good. All right, mucous membranes, are those dry or usually or are they wet? Usually. Should be wet, right? I mean, if you are a mouth breather, they're gonna get dry, right? But it should be wet, right? Okay, so that's good. How about serous membranes, those wonderful wrapping around the organs and all those things? Do you think those things are dry or wet? They're definitely wet, good. So we really only have one dry membrane. What would that be? The skin, okay? So some people like to say these are dry or they're wet, and I think you got it, okay? So no problems on that one. Okay, the last little the last type of way that we classify epithelium, unfortunately, one more, is by glands. Because epithelium, its major job is to be a lining, okay? And here's, of course, all these things here that we talked about with linings, or it can be glands. So epithelium forms all the glands of our body, okay? All the glands. And glands can be either, first of all, they can either be endocrine glands, and we already talked about those already in the first chapter, right? Or they can be exocrine, and that's not something we've talked about yet, okay? So they can either be endocrine or they can be exocrine glands, all right? And endocrine glands are, well, here, let me just give you one word. I spelled it because you say it like this, duct, right? But then you're gonna hear me say duck, right? And then you're gonna think I'm talking about what? Like quack, quack, right? Wrong. Duct, like duct tape, okay, like that. So what's a duct? In the human body, it's a tube. It's a tube. So what do glands do? Let's talk about that first. I'm jumping ahead here. What do glands do? They produce what? What do glands produce? They may produce hormones, good. They may produce, let me give you something like salivary gland. What does it produce? Okay, it's not hard, right? Okay. How about sebaceous gland, like, or a sweat gland? Think about all the glands that we have. It produces sweat, it produces sebaceous, produces oil. We have mammary glands. What do they produce? Milk. Okay, so we got all these different kinds of glands. So let's define, I'm jumping ahead here. Glands produce and secrete a product. And why don't you name some of those products we just named, right? Saliva, oil, sweat, milk, right? All these kinds of things that we have that can be produced by glands. And in addition to that, like what if we are the endocrine gland, pituitary gland, pancreas? Now what are we producing? Insulin, good, and these things are hormones. So a product could be a hormone. Okay, so there's a list of products here I want you to have there. So it could be saliva, milk, oil, it could be a hormone, okay? It could be a hormone. So any one of those particular things. Good. All right, so now let's go down and we'll say now how do we characterize glands? We say, well, they can either be endocrine or they can be exocrine, and the question is, always on the test, you want to know what's the test question, which one has ducts? And that simply means a tube for them to make their product. So let's say that there's saliva. Is there a tube leading from that gland into your oral cavity? Isn't that what you do? Have you ever seen like underneath your tongue, right? There's like a little opening underneath your tongue, like two little openings actually. And the salivary gland goes like that. And when you're like smelling like really a delicious steak cooking on the grill or something, or you see something that makes your mouth what? Water, okay? Those glands, so do they have the ability to, is there a duct? If there's a duct, probably there's an opening. Do you see that right? So there's actually a duct. And that's an example of an exocrine gland. So in other words, here's the gland right here, and it has a tube to expel its contents into wherever it needs to put it. Okay, so there's a tube there. That's the duct. Okay, so it has a duct or not. Endocrine has no duct, and the exocrine has ducts. Okay, so that's the first great question always on a test. Okay, endocrine glands have no ducts, exocrine glands have ducts. So if that's true, how does the pancreas get insulin to the whole body then? If it doesn't have a tube to send it out to the body, what does it do? It's kind of cool. It releases its product directly into the blood, and then the blood transports it on. It's almost kind of like you make your product, your company makes stuff, and it's right there at the ship channel. And then you just throw your logs into or whatever you make into the ship channel, and they just float on down the line, right? Kind of like that, right? So endocrine makes hormone, I'll say that, has no ducts, releases directly into the blood. Okay, so that's how it does it. Releases it directly into the blood. And endocrine glands have hormones. Okay, endocrine glands have hormones. So that makes them distinctly different from exocrine. Okay, and we're going to study a whole chapter on endocrine glands, both the tail end of the semester and the beginning of next. So kind of split it between the two. So endocrine is something we're going to talk about a lot. So now we're going to talk more about exocrine, and I just couldn't fit all my epithelium on one board. So I'm going to have to erase. How terrible, right? So here we go. And let's put exocrine here. So you're still working on exocrine, so I'll just put it here. So exocrine has ducts or no ducts? What did we say? Good. Has the presence of ducts. Okay, so that makes it that way. So we know it has ducts. And it doesn't make hormones. That's not its job. So we're going to characterize it this way. So exocrine glands can be, first of all, one of two things. They can either be unicellular or they can be multicellular. And it sounds weird that you could just be unicellular. I mean, that's just like, it seems like you should be multiple cells to be able to make any of these secretions, right? It's kind of like weird. But but it can be. And an example of that is, I'm going to draw one for you. See if you remember this at all from our drawings. Do you remember this tissue? What was this tissue?
Pseudostratified.
Pseudostratified. What else?
Columnar epithelium.
Columnar, and its last name is?
Epithelium.
Epithelium. So here we are, okay? All right. Didn't I tell you there were like little bubbles with it? Well, it had number one, it had all those little what are those little brush things called?